What did Jesus tell us we should do? Anybody? What's one thing Jesus told us? Follow God. Alright. What else? Be good.
Listen to God.
Listen to God. What else did Jesus tell us to do? Never mind. Tommy?
Shall not praise any other gods.
To recognize that God alone.
Don't sin.
Don't sin.
Follow people that do wrong stuff.
Oh, yeah. Don't be a follower of people who do wrong things. That's good. What else?
He taught us to love.
He taught us to love. That's a big. Jesus, one of the big things with Jesus, now y'all, this is important. One of the big things with Jesus was how we treat other people, wasn't it?
Yeah.
What did he say was the greatest commandment?
Like, out of the 10?
Yep. No. Out of all the commandments, what do you think he said was the greatest commandment? I'll tell you. I'll fit.
Love.
Love. That's exactly right. He said to love God and who else?
Each other.
Each other. To love God and love one another. That's the greatest commandment. He actually said, if you get those two things right, you got the whole deal. Now, one of the ways that Jesus taught us how to love, he had a lot of ways of showing us. One of the ways that he taught us how to love was this is going to sound funny to y'all. He had parties and ate dinner or lunch with all kinds of people. With strangers. Not just strangers. Listen to this. He ate dinner and had supper, lunch, parties with people that nobody else would be with. You know, there's always been, yes?
Because he loves everybody.
Because he loves everybody. Did you know, yes sir?
Sometimes even if they are being mean to you, you still be nice to them.
That's what Jesus taught us, wasn't it? And did you know, and y'all probably know this in school, I think things are getting better in school these days, maybe than when I was a kid. But you know, there are always groups of people that get left out.
Yep.
And, you know, back when I was in school, there were like these things we called cliques. And I remember in school, there were certain kids that were always left out. Sometimes, I've been that kid before. Yeah, popular, that silliness of popular and all that stuff. I actually, I remember times not being invited to things. And that still happens every now and then. How does it feel to get left out and find out later you weren't invited? Sad. Yeah. I'll tell you this, I'm 46 years old. It happened to me here a while back. Some of my friends got together, and I saw that they did, and it was no big thing, except in my heart I was like, I wonder why they didn't invite me. It feels bad to be left out. I'll tell you about Jesus. He never left anybody out. As a matter of fact, if there's anything we learned from him, the people who were left out, they were the first ones he invited to his things. Back 2,000 years ago, this is hard to believe now, but we do the same thing in our own way. Back 2,000 years ago, girls, did you know that women were left out a lot?
They couldn't let them vote before. They couldn't let them vote until 1,500 years later.
Yeah, I mean, that's 100 years ago. Women were often left out. I'll tell you who else, this is crazy. But in that day and time, sick people. Some sick people. There were certain kinds of illnesses that people thought so wrong that they thought that sickness was because the person was bad. No kidding. There was a skin disease called leprosy, and it was a bad rash. And in that day, if you had that, they thought it's because you had done something bad and were a bad person. And if you had it, you had to live outside the city. And if you even came near people, you had to put your hand over your mouth and cry, unclean, unclean, and everybody stay away from you. Women, lepers, there were all kinds of groups. Guess who, when Jesus had a party, he invited to his party?
The people and the women. The sick
Lepers,
people.
women, yep, all the people left out. And you know what they started calling that? They called it the Lord's table. Now the Lord part you get because Jesus is called Lord. The table, what's it mean, the Lord's table? Table is, what do we do at the table?
Eat.
Eat. And so Jesus' habit to eat with all of these people was called his table. He had a table that everybody was welcome at and they ate. And I'll tell you something, some of the people who didn't do that, they were mad at him and they said, he eats with sinners and tax collectors and women. He eats with... And Jesus said, you're right, I sure do. Now the Lord's table means something to us. And it means something to this place right here. The night before Jesus died, watch this. I'll bring it over here and y'all can look at it. Come over here. The night before he left the world, when he died, you know what he did? Guess what Jesus did with his disciples the night before he died? What did he do? What did he do actually?
They had some bread and they drank wine.
He invited them for dinner. They had a meal called the Passover meal. He had this dinner with them. And at the end of the dinner, they didn't know he was going to die. But he did. And they were all full. There was food sitting all over. You know how after you've eaten, there's food sitting all over the table? He picked up a piece of bread. It was just like crumbs of bread. And he looked at them. They had no idea what he meant. He looked at it and he took the bread, took a big piece of bread, and he goes. And he handed it to them. And they were already full. So they knew it had to be something other than just about eating. He handed it to Peter and James and John. He said, take this and eat it. When you do it, remember what he said? When you do it, you what? You remember me. Anybody ever know what it's like to be forgotten? It's sad. Sad to be forgotten. And sometimes when your friends get together and you're not there, you feel, what do you feel?
Sad.
And you feel forgotten. And Jesus looked and he said, I want you to take this bread, and when you do this, he said, when you get together at church, you sing, you pray, you read the Bible. One other thing I want you to do is every now and then I want you to take a cup of the fruit of the vine, grape juice. That's not grape soda, grape juice. He said, I want you to take a cup of grape juice, and I want you to take some bread, and I want you to break the bread, and I want you to take the little grape juice. I want you to eat the bread and drink the grape juice. And he said, the grape juice reminds you of my blood. All right. Now here's what's interesting. Blood to a lot of people is like, oh, it's gross. No. Blood is what makes us live, doesn't it? So when he said, this is my blood, he was saying, this is my life. My body, that's his life too. So he said, I want you to remember me. Now when he says, I want you to remember me, you think he's saying, I want you to look back at a picture and remember that I used to live?
No.
He was saying, I want you to remember the way I lived, and I want you to live that way. So when we take communion, the only other time in the Bible communion's mentioned, later the Apostle Paul, who's one of Jesus' pastors after Jesus died, the Apostle Paul, now listen to this, Ben. The Apostle Paul talked to the church about how they were taking the Lord's Supper, and he called it the Lord's table. And he said, you're doing it wrong. You know why they were doing it wrong? I want you to listen to me. They would come together and have a meal, and then they would take the pieces of the meal, just like Jesus did, and divide it up and say, this is his blood, this is his body. Something bad was happening. It's the only time it's mentioned in the Bible, communion. And they were doing it wrong. In that church, there were rich people, and there were really poor people. And the rich people brought all the food, and the poor people didn't have any to bring. And the rich people actually were getting there ahead of time, eating all of the food, stuffing themselves, and when the poor people got there, there was no food left. And Paul said, you're not doing communion right. You're not doing the Lord's Supper right. You're not doing the Lord's table right, because you know how the Lord would do his table. How?
He'll give it to the poor.
The poor and the rich, right? So here's a church even doing communion, but not doing it right. Because communion isn't about, I drink that and I remember the blood that Jesus shed. I eat this and I remember 2,000 years ago he had a body. No. Jesus' body in this earth are other people. At one day Jesus said, I'm going to tell you, I was hungry and you fed me. And we're going to say, when did we see you hungry? And he said, as much as you did it unto them, you were doing it unto me. So he told them, you're not recognizing the Lord's body. You're holding a piece of bread up and singing the right song and saying, this is his body, and eating it. And the poor person that Jesus loves is sitting right beside you and you're ignoring them. He said, you're not recognizing the Lord's body. So communion is remembering Jesus, but remembering Jesus means living the life of Jesus. And I want to tell y'all how I'll really know that you get communion. Is Monday, after you take communion, you go back to school. And watch this. You got your lunch tray, and you're walking into the lunchroom to sit down. And all your friends are saying, ooh, come over here, come over here, come over here. Or you even see a group of kids you want to sit with that you want them to want you to sit with. We all know how that feels. You're hoping they'll ask you. And you're heading towards sitting where you want to sit with all the kids. And there's a kid sitting by herself. Maybe she's new. Doesn't know anybody. Maybe she has problems. And it makes all the other kids kind of put her out. Maybe he's not nice, like you said. But for whatever reason, that kid's sitting by themselves there. You know how bad it feels to sit by yourself? And here's what you do. Here's what you do. Ben, this is what you do. You understand communion? When you look at that big group of kids and you see a kid sitting alone and you set your tray down beside them and say, hey, I'm Grayson. What's your name? And that kid all of a sudden is loved. He doesn't feel alone. You know what that is? That's not a school lunchroom. That's the Lord's table. And no matter how we do this at church, if we don't understand why we do it, we're not remembering Jesus. This is about recognizing the love of God in all people. That's what he shed his blood for. And that's what he meant when he said, I want you to remember me. Now you get what communion's about? Next time somebody says communion, remember, the Lord's table. How did Jesus operate? How did Jesus live at his table? Yes, Deb?
If someone is sitting alone, sometimes if you talk to them, then it'll make them happy.
And guess who else it makes happy?
Jesus and God.
You got it?
And the Holy Spirit.
That's the Lord's table. Grace, did you want to say something? Okay. All right. Y'all got it?
Yeah.